This is a demonstration of how to turn a net into a three-dimensional shape, a polyhedron. I have my net. In this case, I have two nets, but I'm just going to cut out the one. I have scissors for cutting the paper. I have a straight edge to help me fold, and I have tape to hold it all together. Now, when I do this, my original impulse is to cut these two pieces apart so that I'm only dealing with one net at a time. We're going to do this one. Now, when you're cutting out the net, the goal is to cut out just along the outside lines. And there's a way to handle the corners so that they come out reasonably clean. You do not want to cut on the inside lines. Those are for folding only. So we're going to start by cutting out this net. Cut along the lines. I tend to cut kind of not in the center of the line, but just barely on the outside edge. And notice that I'm cutting with this part of the scissors. I avoid cutting with the tips. When you cut with the tips, it tends to leave bends and folds that you don't want. And also notice that I'm cutting into the inside angle. You don't want to try to, if at all possible, you want to avoid cutting into the angle and then cutting away from it. It's better to cut to the inside vertex and stop on or just a little bit short of that vertex point. Then rotate the paper and cut inward from the other way. Now, when I cut on this side, it's harder to get right onto the outside edge of the line. I just aim for it my best and take my time on cutting. So notice I'm coming in, I'm cutting with the deep part of the scissors. And then when I get close to the vertex, I slow way down and I get it so that they were barely attached and that piece just comes right off. So I keep going around the outside edges, cutting on or just outside the line. It doesn't take long for this shape. It takes longer for the other shapes. When they have really tight inside corners, inside angles, you have to take your time and not worry about trying to cut them all out. There's no prize for cutting out the parts that you don't want in one big piece. Don't bother with that. Just cut out the chunks that you don't need. Also, another technique is to cut across a straightish line from vertex to vertex. That reduces the amount of material you have to deal with, especially when the corners get tight. Some of the pieces have, or the nets have, very tight corners, and you have to get in there, and it's easier just to cut off chunks that are in your way so that you're not, the scissors are not bending the paper as you are cutting. Now, sometimes if the inside corner is really shallow, it's okay to turn the paper like this. But that's if you just have a very shallow angle and you're very confident that you're cutting in a straight manner. So now I've cut out all the outside pieces. I use my straight edge, bring it up to the fold right on the outside edge and fold and crease it down hard. So we're doing that for each one of the inside lines, and some of the polyhedra have really a lot of inside lines. Sometimes that means you have to fold a piece and then fold it out of the way to fold the next shape that you want to do. So just don't rush those, don't bend, don't put folds where you don't want them. So now I've got that, and one more for this. Now that my folds, you notice I folded inward, but when I finish, I want the lines and the letter to be on the outside. So then go and refold these in the opposite direction and make sure they're nice and tight, sharp folds. Now we put the pieces together and we see we have a solid. So now we're just ready to tape. What I recommend is that you take off tape that is shorter than the whole length. You don't want to make it like this one's too long for that piece, but for these two guys, that's good. It fits because it's not going to overlap. The pieces of the tape are not going to go past these parts. And I put the tape on one side, then I bring the other side up, make them match as best that I can. Sometimes you have to push them together and then gently fold the tape over so that they stick. And just keep repeating that for all the other sides. I think it's helpful to put the tape on a side that's already been taped if you have that, and then bring the loose one over, match them up, fold the tape over, and you want a good solid connection on the tape. I have a little gap there. I don't like that, but sometimes they show up. And then the last piece. The last piece, I put the tape on it because otherwise it's too hard to get the tape to stick on that last loose piece. So I have both pieces on that last side or face that I'm putting in, matching up the edges, folding the tape over. And then what I see is I have some spots here that aren't very well taped. So I'm going to take itty bitty little pieces, just a tiny piece to kind of bind them all together. Put that there. I find it usually helps to go back over them once you're done and just rub on all the paper, or all the tape, I mean, and get the tape to stick really well. Start with the nets that have very few faces and get into the practice of what you're doing with that before you dive in and start doing the more complicated ones. Pay attention to what you're doing and how things are turning out or not. There's always that not part. This piece I'm going to take around 2 edges just to sort of bind it all together. And let the tape go where it can be, and make sure that they're all stuck together. I'm not going to worry that these vertices are not all touching. It's close enough for what we're going to do with the polyhedra. So there you have it. Cut, fold, and tape.